What's up, y'all? Des the Mess back once again. We are continuing right along with our dissection of the Insane Clown Posse's discography, including lore, philosophy, politics, psychology, whatever comes up along the way. I do want to say that originally I misspoke and assumed that this EP, Beverly Kills 50187, and the Terror Wheel were out before the Ringmaster, but I was wrong. So here's my verbal correction before we get into this EP's dissection. It's been a while since I listened through all of their material, and I made an incorrect assumption. Moving forward, I'll aim to make sure that my research will be more accurate. And if you, the listener, find something incorrect about my presentation, please feel free to correct me. I and other listeners will appreciate it, I'm sure. So once again, as I said, I am Des the Mess. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. Let's dive right in. So I was listening to Beverly Kills 50187. If that name isn't obvious to you, it's gonna be pretty soon. The album artwork shows a comic book stylized drawing of Violent J in a top hat and carnival barker suit, with Shaggy and his locks out in typical clown jumpsuit, including the neck frills. Jay holds a fireman's axe and Shaggy straddles a toxic waste bin. Behind them, a smoggy city line littered with factories. This EP came between Carnival of Carnage and The Ringmaster, as I said. 1993 release, by the way. So, the eponymous track, Beverly Kills 50187. This is the first recorded instance of the term Juggalo on a song. Violent J says, "I can Juggalo like you never thought you'd ever know." There's some context to that that's not super important as far as surrounding lyrics go, but that's what I wanted to point out here. This track and the EP itself shows their first evolution of sound from the gritty sounds of Carnival of Carnage toward a more refined but still rugged sound that would be followed on The Ringmaster and Terror Wheel. The shortest song on this EP is 5 minutes and 3 seconds, with the longest one being 8:31 to close it out. The problematic lyrics are still here, and I'm not going to call out every single one, but for now, let's think about the title. Beverly Kills 50187. Beverly Kills, of course, is a play on Beverly Hills, which is still regarded as a very affluent area of California. 50 is a slang term for police, and 187 is a law enforcement code for murder. This is a clever, direct attack on rich people and police, and I really enjoy that. The song opens up with a bar where they say, "Carnival of Carnage creepin' round." While this EP came out a full year after COC released, it could be seen as a prerequisite warning to the big town that the carnival, as a mythical event, was approaching. One of the two lyrics I want to point out in this song is how they talk about killing a rich kid who is gay, which I think is a callback to Ghetto Freak Show on Carnival of Carnage. While it isn't explicitly stated here, there's an obvious theme of homophobia I'm not going to ignore. ICP has gotten better over the years, but as I said on the last episode, it took them a pretty long time. The second thing I'll point out is how there is a skit part of this song where Violent J is coercing someone into sex because he's about to kill her anyway. It's followed by Shaggy saying, "Okay, but I'm not a raper." They still justify her murder because she's rich, but I don't think it should be glossed over that Jay is advocating for rape with the threat of death, with Shaggy essentially saying, "But no, we actually wouldn't." It's edgy and obviously problematic, so I wanted to include that. Again, with these lyrics, right, if you're listening or watching this series, you kind of know what to expect, we're talking about a very controversial band who had very edgy and problematic things to say and still does. I'm not going to hide from addressing them. And I don't think that's a bad thing, I can look at this stuff more objectively, and remove some of my biases while also examining my own bias. I think a really fun thing I'm noticing about doing this series so far is as I take a listen again to all of these songs, and I have listened to almost all of them. Like in the past, I mean, I've listened to this EP, I've listened every Joker's Card up through Bang Pow Boom, I listened to a lot. Most of their EPs, I didn't have all of them, I found some of them online over the years. The point is, I've listened to a lot of their stuff over and over, and as I grew up and sort of grew out of the music, you know, reapproaching it, I have less of a bias. But I'm also able to look at it and think about what I do like about it. And that's kind of the whole point of this series, right? Is we're finding the things that are good and we're finding the things that are problematic. We're not ignoring them. We're really dissecting them. We're talking about why it's important to address them and what we can do better as people, while knowing Violent J and Shaggy aren't perfect people. And they don't have to be. I don't think anybody really has to be. We just kind of have to be better than the people who came before us. That's kind of all I wanted to say about that. So we'll jump into 17 Dead. This song is about how people die, usually by violence, in the inner city all the time, and it's underreported or ignored by the media. Whenever tragedy strikes in a suburb, though, it becomes a national headline and suddenly concern grows. Interestingly, I think this is a good point to make, although it wasn't extrapolated upon by ICP, about how news is both over-sensationalizing violence when it happens in upper-class neighborhoods and playing it down as statistics whenever it happens in poor areas. We can also see pretty clearly how, for instance, Fox News will spam their viewers with gang violence scares in an effort to spread racist stereotypes, while ignoring systemic issues about what drives people into poverty and gangs. Likewise, more liberal media outlets are full of virtue signaling and thoughts and prayers mentality. There's a larger discussion to be had about how media and politics are performative theater, and I could talk at length about it, but let's bring it back to the clowns. Violent J says, "Should I burn a rebel flag or the red, white, and blue too?" He's clearly frustrated with inaction of government and media to properly address these major issues. The poverty, the homelessness, you know, all the stuff we're talking about. In this case, it's people dying to gang violence, right? We're not addressing the causes. We're making criminal... And yes, murder's bad, obviously, like criminals. But the point is, we're criminalizing people who end up in desperate situations that resort to violent crime. We're not addressing the issue that gets them there. We're only penalizing them for having done it. Then there's no rehabilitation, right? Our prison system isn't built for rehabilitation. It's built to continue to suck you back into it. You get put out on probation or parole when you get out of prison, and if you make sometimes the tiniest fuck up, you can go back for years. You know, there are people who've been in prison for sometimes decades. They get out, they're on parole for a couple more years, and they do something like smoke weed, and then they're right back in prison. There is no rehabilitation in the way that we've built our prison and justice. I should call it a judicial system, because it's not really justice. There's no rehabilitation in our prison and judicial system, and there needs to be. And even though Violent J isn't going all the way there with that point that I'm making, that's the type of stuff that he's talking about when he says that, like, they're ignoring the fact. The whole story is that 17 people died in gang violence, and it's being ignored. But then it's also used to scare people in the suburbs of, like, how bad the cities are and stay away. But also, it's only really a big deal when it happens in a suburb. And that's a problem. Anytime there's any sort of, you know, freak accident or extreme violence in a suburb, you know, or a rural area, then it's like, oh, this never happens here, and you'd never see this in this neighborhood. Statistically speaking, where there are more people, there are going to be more crimes. So obviously, if population is more dense, the amount of crime goes up. That makes sense. But you also have to take into account all of the systemic issues that cause that. When you get into the suburbs, it's a lot of, like, white-collar crime. And that goes almost completely ignored by media. Anyway... The point is, Violent J is seeing this, right, in 1993 when he's writing this EP, basically him and Shaggy, that America doesn't stand for them, right? Like, it's not doing, in their case, they're living in the inner cities, right? They would call it the ghetto zone in a lot of their lyrics. It's not doing them any favors. In fact, it reinforces the fact that people in their situation should just continue to live in poverty and eventually houselessness until they die. And that's kind of true, right? The government at large doesn't effectively tackle what we can do to prevent houselessness and poverty, and it only wants to put band-aids on small issues to make it look good so they can continue to get it reelected. And again, that's a large tangent, and it's not one that Violent J is addressing here. But you can see how he'd be mad for him to say, should he burn a rebel flag or ours, right? The red, white, and blue. Like, yeah, he's mad. And by the way, for anyone who has anything to say about that, it is legal to burn an American flag. A lot of people will get mad about it. I can't say that's true, though, in every city and state. But federally, it is legal because it's a form of protest to burn an American flag. Police won't like you doing it, so I don't recommend just doing it. But really, in most cases, there's nothing someone can do to stop you if you're doing it in protest and you're doing it safely and there's no risk for, like, arson, basically. So burn your flags responsibly, kids. So here are some of the lyrics that I pulled out of it, right? 17 dead in mi barrio, right? Mi barrio is Spanish for their neighborhood. Do or don't, yeah. 17 dead in mi barrio. Do or don't you care about the 17 dead? Drive down my street and stare at the people who can't make ends meet. Right? So that is kind of how I talked about this in the last episode, about how middle class and rich people tend to look at poor people with, like, what's the word I'm trying to say? I said it correctly on the last episode. But essentially, it's like, oh man, I just feel so bad. I wish I could do something. And, like, rich people look at them in awe and kind of disgust. Like, I can't believe people would choose to live that way. And they'd rather stare at the problem and not realize that there are symptoms to the problem and figure out a solution, right? Also, it's hard to say that there's a middle class in America, but most working people, and when I say working people, I mean people who have a job to do and bills to pay, that if they don't show up at their job, they can't pay their bills, right? So if you are in that position, you're working class. Everyone else is above you, like, is rich, right? Elon Musk, if he, like, doesn't go to work for several months, probably can still afford to just exist. There is also a lot to be said about how rich people have social credit that gets them into a lot of places and gets them access to a lot of resources for free. They have the money to pay for this stuff, and people will just be like, no, it's okay, you're rich and or famous, we'll just let you into this club, and we'll just buy you this dinner, and we'll do this or that. And they're all in that, George Carlin said that, it's all a big club and you ain't in it. Middle-class people, working-class people don't have that luxury. If I stop working, I have, like, a month before I lose my house. That's, I will not be able to pay rent if I stop working. Someone like Elon Musk doesn't have to work. He has passive income because he owns several companies. That's the difference. Someone like Elon Musk driving through, San Francisco, which is where he works and where I live, is going to see the same type of people that I do. And if he stares at them, and I don't think he even drives through San Francisco because he's kind of disgusted by this city, but if he was, like, staring at them, it would be with disgust. It would be like, oh, I can't believe that they're choosing to live that way. Meanwhile, he, like, doesn't ever have to have that problem. If Elon Musk stops working, he doesn't just lose his house or his car, or, like, he might lose his, I don't know if he owns a private jet, but you get what I'm saying. He doesn't lose a whole lot to just not show up at his job. If I stop showing up at my job, I lose everything in a matter of weeks. That's the difference. I am so much closer to being a houseless person than I will ever be to being Elon Musk. That's a really harsh reality. Violent J is saying that in pretty simple terms here. Drive down my street and stare at the people who can't make ends meet. That's cut and dry. Like, that is so, it's just what it is. So really, this song has a lot of good lines about the distinctions between classes, and I love it. There's a ballad of sort at the end, and it reminds me of the Wraith Shangri-La album, which had a lot of split song tracks. So on this EP and on some of their other releases, they do a lot of, like, I would call it a split song track, because, it's like I said, their shortest song here is 5 minutes and 3 seconds, and then their longest is 8.5 minutes. So all of that is, they have like a skit, and they'll have like maybe some banter or something, and then it's like a song, and then it's either another skit or like another sort of a song. It's not like a full fleshed out song, but it's two different melodies, two different beats, different kinds of writing, and they just do that. So yeah, they do that all through this EP. Is just split song tracks. That's what I call it. I'm sure there's a term. I'll look it up to see if I can find what it is I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about, and I think you might too if you're listening. But there might be like an official term for when an artist does that I just don't know yet. So then we have the stalker. In this song, Violent J takes on the persona of a stalker who follows around a woman in his delusion. At the end, he ends up breaking into her house, chasing her upstairs, and she shoots him in the head. While the buildup of this song might sound like they're advocating for the behavior, it's pretty clear they're against it once you get to this line. There is a section at the end where a person, who is supposed to be an actual stalker, is leaving repeated voicemails on a woman's answering machine. It's eerie and creepy, and it paints a pretty grim picture of what it's like to have someone harassing you in that way. For all of this, I feel very confident that they're showing how serious and awful it is to stalk people. Again, I don't want to, split hairs about every type of lyric or everything. When I'm reading these lyrics and I'm listening along and then I'm writing about them, I'm taking a lot of this stuff into consideration. Impact versus intent, right? What are they saying? What is their intent? And what is actually being perceived? My perception of this song is that they're saying, I think Violent J, and I could be misremembering this, but I think Violent J knew someone who was getting stalked, and I'm under the assumption that the voicemail that they're playing at the end of this song is like the actual voicemail that woman received. It could be a voice actor, but it sounds a little bit too real, so I'm not quite sure. I don't want to say that's what it is, but that's what it sounds like. So I'm under the assumption that Violent J knew someone who was getting stalked and wrote this song as kind of like, this is disgusting and you shouldn't be doing that. Which is why him dying at the end is poetic justice. That's why I have to look at it as advocating against stalking and not saying it's okay. It's really hard sometimes because of the nature of the music that they're writing to take them seriously, and also they're clowns, so how seriously can you really take them? But I'm doing the best that I can to make points about this sort of stuff, and it's all interesting to me, right? Or I wouldn't be doing an entire series about it. But yeah, it's because of the nature of the music they create and the lyrics they write and their attitudes and their sort of stage persona, it can be really hard to talk about this stuff and not have people scratch their heads, especially people who grew up in more, I'll say, progressive or leftist thought. They just grew up that way and they don't know anything else, right? I don't want to call that lucky, really, but I didn't have that type of privilege, right? Because of the way that I grew up, I had a different understanding. So again, when I'm listening to this, I'm going back to my early to mid 20s when I'm hearing this stuff for the first time versus how I'm hearing it now and what I can take from it. So while I can appreciate, their themes and where they're coming from, I also am looking at it with a more mature and more nuanced perspective. And I hope you're following along in that way. And then we have In the Haughh, exclamation point, which I'm pretty sure was just Shaggy getting drunk and trying to say in the house, and they were like, fuck it, we're keeping it. That's totally fine. The beginning of this song has a skit sort of section where it's really difficult to listen to because they echo a few times. I'm ready to get canceled on YouTube for this. Bitch ass faggot. They just say it like 4 times, and I was like... So when I revisited this song, I remembered that it was problematic, but I couldn't remember why. Before the minute mark, I was like, oh yeah, that line. So here's a quote I took from the Genius Lyric website from Violent J on old homophobic lyrics. And the amount of gay juggalos out there is really surprising. I think about them doing their research and getting the old records, getting excited about it, and getting their hearts broke or something, I tell my daughter, for the rest of your life, when your friends ask why your dad said that, say it's because your dad was a fool. Don't defend me. Say I was a fool then, but I'm not now. There's no excuse. I was going with the flow, and that's the very thing we preach against, being a sheep. And that's what I was doing. So ICP in 1993 really didn't know better, and now they do. And they're not perfect, but they've shown they can grow. Violent J doesn't want his problematic behaviors defended, and I think it serves as a good reminder to juggalos that the subculture attracts outcasts and weirdos of all kinds with the hope of embrace. I'm a trans juggalo, right? Like, it's weird saying that out loud. It's really weird saying that out loud, but that's my whole point, right? I didn't understand my queerness when I was younger. I kind of knew it was there, but I couldn't fully address it because I didn't have people and support systems in place that could help me address it in a healthy way. Now that I understand it, I can, I made this point on my first episode of the series where I was talking about ICP and how they say we take all shapes, sizes, colors, and genders. Right? They probably didn't have the language to talk about trans people then, but they were starting to approach the point. Here we are now in 2023, where Violent J, I don't know what time that quote was taken from, but the fact that he's able to look at that, right? So we know at the time of the quote, he's got a daughter old enough to understand that he said that stuff. So I want to say maybe his daughter's 10 or 12 at the time. That's the way I have to look at it, because I don't know what the interview is from. I can find it out, and I'll link it in the description with a correction. So, all of that being said, Violent J can come out and say, like, look, I was an asshole, I didn't know better, and now I'm trying better, right? Like, I think for me as a leftist, that's what I ask of most people. I don't expect anybody else to be perfect. I expect some sort of change, right? Like, I don't want to say I expect change either, because that sounds arrogant, but the point I'm trying to make is I have difficult conversations with friends all the time about different political issues, especially stuff that doesn't affect them, right? Because some of the people I grew up with aren't trans. Well, a lot of them actually, but the point is, when I'm talking to my cis friends about trans issues, I'm talking to my straight friends about queer issues. They're not going to be perfect, but I can see them making the effort, so I'm a lot less judgmental. When my mom isn't going to use my name and pronouns, I'm just going to block her. I blocked her, right? Like, that's too bad, so sad. You've had 7 years. Get over it. Trying not to trauma dump here, but you get where I'm going with this, right? Like, I think the best way into social progress is through trying to progress. Not just saying, like, yeah, I know that's a problem, I'm just not going to do anything about it, because that makes you, witness, basically. Not witness. The word I'm looking for is, it's gone. You're put on standby. You're a bystander, right? Like, if you know a crime is going to happen and you do nothing to stop it, you're an accessory. If or you could be, right? If you know a crime is going to happen and you like watch it happen, you're a bystander. If you don't know a crime is going to happen, you can't be implicated in it, right? Like that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. And when I'm speaking about crimes, obviously I'm talking about things like microaggressions and whatever else. But the point is, I'm never going to fault someone for saying, hey, I didn't know this and now I know better, and then making an effort. I'm not in a position to judge because I've been doing that for more than a decade, slowly learning where I was wrong and moving in the right direction. And it was hard, right? It wasn't easy, but I'm not going to defend. I will never defend, right? Violent J himself said he doesn't want people to defend his old behaviors. He just wants people to know he's trying, that he's working within his frame of reference to do the best that he can. And I think he's not surrounded by a lot of people who have trans experience or who have queer experience, So it's harder for him, to like make that initiative. I don't want Violent J to become like a queer rights scholar. I don't think he has the time or energy or motivation to do that sort of stuff. But when he's saying in an interview that like he wants people to look back at his music and be like, yeah, he was kind of a jerk and he's figuring it out, right? Like that's progress. So I'm not going to hold Violent J to the standards of today by what he said in 1993. I'm going to cringe about it, I'm not going to defend the fact that he said it. I'm just going to be like, that's a guy who's growing and he's learning, and that's acceptable. So, yeah, the rest of the song is pretty much Violent J and Shaggy talking shit, and I'm pretty sure Shaggy was drunk, like I said. It also features Grease E, who makes one of his few appearances ever on ICP material before he faded into obscurity. I don't know what that guy's up to today. I haven't heard anything about him at all. I was 2 years old when this EP came out, so I wouldn't have even known who the fuck he was back then. If I was a Juggalo, there's no way. But the point is, I haven't heard anything about it since I've been into ICP, and I got into them in like 2006, 7-ish. So we have Chop Chop. This is basically a Juggalo anthem of sorts. There's a phone skit at the beginning, and then they chant Juggalos over and over as the intro riff starts. The chorus is got to be funky, swing, 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 and chop, chop, chop. So I imagine that performances of this song, especially earlier in their career, might be characterized by crowd interaction. This chorus is somewhat revived on the Chop Chop Slide song nearly 16 years later. Actually, yeah, it is 16 years, 2009. Math is fun. On Bang Pow Boom as a bonus track. Jay talks about the exaggerated, of course, difficult and toxic conditions of living in Detroit. When I say exaggerated, I'm saying his language is cartoonish. I probably should have pulled a lyric out of that, and I did not, and I can't think of one off the top of my head, so that's what it is. Isham is on the song as well, and Jay says it's an Isham beat, which suggests he played a major part in the production of the song. So then we have Joke Ya Mind, which is the last song on this EP. This opens up with a skit about an unhoused man getting shooed away from a storefront for loitering, making it look bad. Jay plays the man, responding to his condition, how he's cold, but rich people get to be warm. They laugh at him like he's a clown. All he wants is a place to sleep. The song moves into talking about seemingly the dream of the homeless man, having no worries, flying across the world, waking up in a golden bed. I can breathe the magic mist, he says, and it makes me think that we're talking about drugs. Many people without permanent housing or compromised living situations develop drug problems as a way to cope with their conditions. So this song seems like a poor man's happy trip, dreaming and hallucinating that things are or will be perfect for him someday. There is the announcer, Joker, finalizing the coming of the Carnival of Carnage, led by the Wicked Clown, the iconic blue and pink jester of the Carnival of Carnage album. So this is the Joker announcement. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Wicked Clowns will arrive in your town soon, and believe me, it won't be pretty. Justice must be served. To the uncaring, selfish, wealthy ones, be prepared and get ready to catch 400 years of hell. And oh, one last note to all, Wicked Clown is in the house. When they say Wicked Clown there, I'm pretty sure they're just talking about the Juggler off the Carnival of Carnage album. Like, that is the Wicked Clown. But I'm only saying that because it's singular there, and in almost every other usage they use Wicked Clowns plural because they're referring to themselves, but also different clown spirits of the carnival that may or may not be named. So I think that's important, right? If the imagery of the Carnival of Carnage is basically the spiritual or mystical embodiment of the violence of inner cities and ghettos coming to the suburbs that wipes everybody out, right? Like, that's what the Carnival of Carnage is, and it's led by the Ringmaster, which we will get to in the next episode. He basically walks the carnival into town, and everyone is killed. They don't realize that they're dead, and they're at the dark carnival, and that's where they start going on rides and kind of learning about how am I trying to put that? Like, they're learning about their lives and the consequences of their actions. That's the dark carnival is judgment. So the Carnival of Carnage is like the physical manifestation of the metaphor of the violence, if that makes sense. It's not the actual like people. It's like backtracking a little bit, right? So like, it's not the people in the ghetto per se, like, coming to the suburbs. It's their angst and their stress and their conditions manifesting itself, right? Like, so if you have the physical, the poverty and the houselessness and the gang violence and all that stuff manifesting itself as like anger and resentment and political fury and the want for change, those are all like their feelings, so they're not physical things. That gets re-manifested into the physical representation, which is the Carnival of Carnage. And when that shows up in your town, it fucks you up. You're just dead. That brings you to the Dark Carnival, which is the afterlife, or God, or not. There's a lot going on, I know. If you're hip to this, you know what I'm talking about, and if you're not, it might be a little confusing. But when you appear at the Dark Carnival, that's where you go on rides that are tailored to your specific judgment, and it will determine if you're going to heaven or hell. And that's all the imagery, right? Every album, every Joker's card has something to do with the Dark Carnival, at least the first 6. We're going to get to the second set a long time from now, and I'm going to be eating my words because some of it is more abstract, and it's harder for me to wrap my head around because I haven't listened to it a whole lot. So, anyway, all of that is to say, the Carnival of Carnage is a physical manifestation of the emotional manifestation of the physical conditions of living in poverty and violence in underrepresented and underserved areas of usually inner cities, which is where Violent J and Shaggy, aka Joey and Joe, grew up. That's what it is. So they're coming to bring, in this case, they're just putting a number on it, 400 years of hell to all of the people. They're leaving them in a torturous limbo at this carnival. The song ends with an unfortunate reality. The houseless guy from the skit earlier is woken up by a thief who demands he give up what he's got, but he doesn't have anything to give, so he's shot and killed. This is followed by another beat change and the repetition of the stalker until the track ends. I'm not sure why the stalker thing happens there at the end. I thought it was interesting. It might, again, be because of Violent J's relationship to someone who may have been stalked. I'm taking a lot of assumption out of this, right? I probably could have looked it up a little bit further. I remember something in the Behind the Paint book about it, but I don't remember. I want to go through that book. I think that'll be cool to, like, I might do that after the first set. Anyway, we're projecting too much. The point is, in this song, right, the opening skit is about just a guy who's trying to find somewhere to sleep because he lives on the streets, and some guy shooing him away, right? And then he breathes in the magical mist, and then suddenly he can fly, and he's like waking up, and his bed is golden, and everything he wants is there, and he's just happy and content. And then he's actually rudely awakened from his high because he comes down or whatever. You know, this thief is like kicking him, waking up, and is like, give me what you got. And he doesn't have anything, and he's shot. I don't know, because I'm not there, if like this is something Violent J knew about, but also I don't find that uncanny, right? I would think people who are living in similar conditions, like, let me talk from my perspective instead of trying to make my imaginations about this. So when I think about someone in my case of privilege, if I was gonna steal something, it would be from someone who has more privilege than me, because it doesn't make sense for me to be kicking down, right? Like, I'm not saying I'm gonna steal in the first place, but in this hypothetical situation where I'm stealing from someone, it's gonna be from someone who has more means than I do, because it would have a less impact on their life, right? If people will try to say that stealing is immoral, and I would say there's a moral implication to why someone steals, right? Like, if I have nothing and I live on the streets, I'm gonna try to do anything I can to keep food in me, right? Because I have to. If I'm trying to survive, I want food, I probably want water, and I need somewhere to sleep. Everything else has to be figured out day to day, but those are my 3 priorities: is somewhere safe to sleep, food, and something to drink. You know, if I have a drug problem, that's a whole nother thing to add to it. But when I think about that, you know, the guy in this case has a gun, so he already has more means than the homeless guy sleeping on a sidewalk. And to me, that's just evil, right? Like, if I'm gonna put labels on that, the idea of someone who's like, man, that guy has less than me, I'm gonna take whatever else it is that he's got. Like, that's exactly what the 1% is doing to the working class, right? They're like, oh, y'all don't have the means to, like, make it in the world? Well, we're gonna squeeze even more blood from this stone until it crumbles, essentially. And it's unfair. I don't know of any, like, documented cases where that's happened, but I'm sure it happens, and that might be my privilege speaking too, right? Knowing that, again, like, it doesn't make sense to me because of the way that my personal moral code, my, like, inherent beliefs are, to take from someone who has less than me. I would rather take from someone who has more and then give it to someone else. It reminds me of a couple different social experiments that I've seen on YouTube. One of them was a guy who had like 100 $1 bills taped to his jacket, right? And just walked around with a sign that said, take only what you need. And, like, you would see someone who was really scraggly and, like, not wearing the best clothes take, like, $3 and just be like, man, I just needed some food. That was it, right? Or bus fare or whatever. And then you'd see someone middle class maybe take, like, $5, and they're like, you know, I just want to make sure my lunch is paid, or my meter's paid or something. And then there's, like, a rich guy, right, comes up in a fucking suit and is just every dollar, you know? And the guy's like, you really need that? You really need that with your Rolex and your iPhone? He's like, yeah, you said take what I need, right? Like, to me, that's an evil dynamic. Is like, that person knowingly has way more than he will ever use and still wants more, and he's taking it from this person who I have to assume is like middle or working class, who's doing the experiment, and is just like, fuck you, buddy, I'm taking every dollar you got taped to this jacket just because. You don't need it, right? It was take what you need. That guy didn't need the money, he wanted it. And that's the difference between want and need. The second social experiment is someone would dress up as like different classes, basically. So what they've discovered is if you're dressed really down, your chances of getting money from someone by just like, hey man, can you give me $1, was really significantly lower if you looked like you might be houseless or, you know, have other sort of, if you look poor, right? If we have to stereotype it that way because that's the nature of this social experiment. If socially speaking you looked poor and you asked someone for $1, you're less likely to get $1. If you're like, you look middle class, people were more likely to give you $1. And if you looked upper class, people were just like, yeah, no problem, like instantly, no thought at all. And that's so screwy to me. That is so screwy to me. Anytime I've been in a financial jam and I've asked someone for money, and I hate asking, but it happens sometimes. I think I don't want to say most of us, right? Because there are people who are super privileged and never. But a lot of people have ended up in situations where they got to ask mom or they got to ask their friend for 30, 50 bucks, whatever, to get them through the week, whether it's groceries, gas, or just, you know, bus money, whatever. Like, we all need help sometimes. And the idea of when I have it, me not giving it to someone else who asks doesn't make sense, right? Like, it's kind of a core belief of mine, right? The anarchist or communist view that from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. When I'm asking, I don't expect help, right? I understand if the person I'm asking can't help me. But if they can, I make sure to pay it back to them because I know, right? And hopefully someday I'm in a position that if that same person asks me, I can pay it right back. Yeah, here you go, right? I got it. I can do that for you. I can help. I also believe in paying it forward, right? There's been several times someone's like, hey man, like, can I borrow $30? You know, I'm like, whatever. It's fucking $30. Sometimes I have not had that. So I know what it's like to need $30. I'm not really going to ask what you need it for. If they tell me, great. Like, I trust most people when they're doing financially unwell that they're asking because they're desperate. I don't want to get into, you know, the politics of like, what if that person's doing drugs or whatever. Really, I don't care, right? If I'm giving you $30, it's because I have $30 to give. And if you don't ever give that back to me, I might never give you money again because I learned my lesson, right? Like, but also, if you're willing to pay me back or want to or whatever, I'm likely to be like, pay it forward. Someone's going to ask you one day, hey, can I have 30 bucks? And you're going to remember the time I gave it to you, right? And that's not to put myself on some pedestal. I don't just have money to give away to people. But that's my whole point, is there are times when I've needed money and someone else gave it to me, and they're like, give it to someone else who need it. And knowing that put me in, like, I'm not indebted to a person anymore. I'm kind of indebted to society to just do better and give to someone else who might need it. In the same way, I extend that, right? I'm saying to someone else, pay this forward to someone else who could use that $30 the same way someone told it to me. And hopefully that person doesn't end the chain, right? For me, paying it forward isn't about like buying the guy behind me Starbucks because I've got extra $20 on me or something. That's really ridiculous and kind of classist because it doesn't do anything, right? Like, people who can afford, usually people who can afford to go and sit in the line in a Starbucks drive-thru don't need you to pay for their coffee. They go there with the intent that they have the money for it. Starbucks is kind of expensive for a fast food / coffee place. So paying it forward in that way is just ridiculous to me. If I know someone else can really use $30 and they would gladly pay me back if they had it on me, I'm going to tell them to pay it forward. I would rather, because I know one day either I might need it back, sometimes I'd rather have that mutual understanding too. Is like, hey, like I got into a jam and I really need this. Like having good rapport with people and building communities around the idea that we don't owe each other, we're just working together, is the fundament here. So to wrap that all up, bringing it back to this hypothetical thief in the song who shot a homeless guy because he said, I don't have anything. I literally don't have anything. And this thief ended his life. That's fucking heartbreaking. And I know somewhere in the world that's a reality, and that's disgusting. Like, it doesn't make sense to me to want to take something from someone who has less than me, or nothing at all, for my own gain. Like, it's hyper selfish, and it really doesn't make sense to me. So, yeah, this EP, it's hard to listen to because of the problematic language sometimes. I think it's sometimes harder to listen to because of the way that it addresses this, right? Like, some people might look at that skit and just be like, oh man, that's fucked up, And they're right, it is, but why is it fucked up? Because of all of the implications I just set forward, right? All of this discussion I just had about how ridiculous it is that someone would steal from somebody who has so much less than them. Like, it's... Talk about kicking someone when they're literally down on the ground. That guy was sleeping, sleeping on a sidewalk, assuming, because it's never clearly stated, but you can assume based on the song and the skits involved. The point is, like, that's how they presented the Carnival of Carnage, is all of this type of stuff is happening every day in very underserved communities, right? Neighborhoods in big cities that don't receive the proper funding, that are either over-policed or so under-policed that it's anything goes, and that's... I'm not gonna say that's worse, you know what I mean? But, like... there's a larger discussion about the problems with police, of course, so I'm trying to be careful about how I stated that, and I recognize where it could be problematic. The point I'm trying to make is areas like that are really tough to grow up in, where a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck, or like less than, or people are literally on the streets. There's gang violence, there's heavy crime, like petty crime like that happening all the time. That's a direct condition of capitalism and misgovernance, right? Like, if you have an area in your city that's like that, and people aren't... when I say people, I don't mean me and you, right? We can only do so much. We can do better if we have organizations, if we work with our friends, or we join a nonprofit, or we're doing actual groundwork activism to help people like that, or work in a field where that's the sort of thing you can do. But the political machine at large is not tailored to helping people. It simply isn't. It can't be. It's too busy doing what that petty thief was doing, right? Holding the gun to us, the working class, which in this metaphor is that guy sleeping on a sidewalk, and saying, give it to me or else. That is... Violent J and Shaggy, again, are not Marxists, but, like, for me, for someone who is very socialist, that blows my mind that they're putting it out there, right? They're using the language that they have, which is the theme of this entire series. They're using the language they had, which in this case is really gory, fucked up, skits and songs, to reach people and say, look, this world is fucked up and it's preventable, right? We don't have to keep doing it this way, and it should have never been this way in the first place. Something better can happen. They use it to make a religious/spiritual movement, and you know what? I fucking appreciate that, right? Like, I wouldn't even be talking about this stuff if it didn't matter, and it really does matter, and it's touched a lot of people's lives, and it's brought people like me both to tears and to a better understanding that, like, yeah, life can be better, and I ought to try to be a better person so I can do good by the rest of the world. It took me a long time to actually follow through on that, but again, like, the fact that the message is there means it's reaching people. So yeah, like Violent J says, I hope more people like me are looking back on the old stuff and saying, like, man, that's fucked up, but I understand, right? I do understand, because I was there. I've said pretty awful things about people, either people I knew or just in general, that sometimes I knew better, and I knew I shouldn't be saying the things that I did. And in going back and dissecting ICP's music, I'm able to appreciate the growth they're making as people in their 30-something year career, as well as the growth I've made on my own, and how I can do better and continue to do right by other people. So yeah, that was a mouthful. That was a large mouthful, but this is something I'm very passionate about, So this EP doesn't include any sort of segue or spoiler leading to the Ringmaster. It feels like, compared to other EPs where they included hotline numbers and hidden tracks, that this one ends abruptly. Something that we will get to on the Terror Wheel is the hotline number thing, right? Like, I don't feel like I have to cover a whole lot about it, but on later EPs, in between Joker's cards, they would give out a hotline number, and it was always with a riddle, right? Like, they basically would have like a breakdown hidden track thing, and they'd be like, call this number, and here's a rap line giving you the numbers, right? It was 1313 because it's Detroit, 313 yada yada yada, and they would like rap it and be like, this, and the answer is, and leave it blank, and that's for you to be like, oh fuck, it rhymes with, great, so therefore the next number is 8, just as an example. I'm pretty sure all those numbers are defunct, or if you call them, they might be other businesses. So if you go back and, listen to their stuff, or in some cases it was like on comic books or lyric books, I think, please know that is not, you're probably not going to get that answer anymore, because we're talking about, in this case, right, like the one on the Terror Wheel specifically, Terror Wheel was released in 94, so that would be 29 years old. It's not there anymore. Please don't call. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but I know someone's going to try. So yeah, if you find a hidden number from, one of ICP's old spoiler hotlines or something, don't call it. It's probably defunct. If I'm wrong, let me know, but I haven't tried, and I would really assume that they don't have the funding to just keep a phone line like that open for no reason, longer than they had to advertise their next album. This EP, overall, I like it. I like it a lot. As I said, there's some really heavy problematic stuff, but it's fun, it's catchy, it brings up a lot of social issues, stuff I'm looking at now, right? I live in San Francisco, and I haven't seen, someone robbed at gunpoint like that, so I'm gonna say yet, because I live in San Francisco, it might happen. That's a tough reality, right? Knowing that someone out there was robbed. Maybe they had drugs or something, and they're sleeping on the sidewalk, and someone took them for the very last bit they had. That's a reality, right? I work in an area that's really tough, where I see this sort of stuff. People just, and I'm not saying that in judgment, but it's true, right? People literally live on the sidewalk, and that's really tough. And this is the type of stuff that Violent J and Shaggy saw in the late 80s and early 90s when they were writing this stuff. So I didn't understand, right? I can look at this politically in my 20s and be like, wow, that's fucked up. People actually live that way. I didn't live in a city, right? I saw it a little bit when I lived in Cleveland up until last year. I've seen it the most since I've lived here in San Francisco, and it's tough, and I don't wish that on anybody. What I do wish is that people understand that there are systems in place that are continuing this, and Violent J and Shaggy talk about that, right? Like, the government isn't doing anything. Why? Because it's very easy for them to just keep people sick and poor and without houses. Your rent's not going down anytime soon. You want to know why? And it's not always because of inflation. It's because there are landlords who literally are just like, I could make a couple more bucks, and they will raise your rent. That's not fair, right? That's a system that's in place to keep you down. And when you consider that, how does someone who is currently living in a tent, so therefore doesn't have a physical address, probably doesn't have a phone, how do they apply for services, right? Get into a permanent or semi-permanent living situation so that they can have a physical address to apply for a job, also while probably, in this case, being sober and clean from drugs for a long enough period of time to obtain and retain that employment, and then, knowing the way the economy is structured, be able to save enough money to slowly elevate their way away from that, right? The system is not built for people to do that. We live in a very punishing society and a very punishing economy, and it's not built for people to be able to escape it. You either get lucky and build a rap empire like ICP did, or you end up doing what I'm probably going to do, which is working 40 hours a week for the rest of my life, because I don't know if I'm ever going to retire. And I don't want to say it's okay, but it's something I've really grappled with, right? I'm 32, and I'm considering that if I don't make a career, that might be it, right? I might just be doing whatever I'm doing for the rest of my life until I stop being able to do it. And then it's only a matter of time before I run out of resources. And if I'm not placed in the right spot at the right time, that could be the end. And that's dark. That's a really dark reality. So, again, as Violent J said, I'm not going to defend the type of language he used or the way that he used it. I'm going to defend the fact that he was ignorant because he said that. I was a fool. I think he knows better now, and he's learning. He's constantly learning. Even if it's slowly, it's more than some people are doing. I'm aiming to do the same thing because I'm not perfect. I don't expect perfection from anybody. Certainly not myself. Certainly not you, the listener. So yeah, that's a really long-winded rant. And this entire EP, whether it knows it or not, is very anti-capitalist, and I love it. It says so much about so many things that I didn't understand and probably took for granted the first couple times that I heard it, because I didn't understand how real that was. You don't really know something until you see it or experience it. I can only ever sympathize, with anything. I can only ever sympathize with anything that someone else has gone through until it happens to me, and then I can empathize. And that's kind of tough. I want, as much as possible in my life, to just meet people where they're at. I really strive to be non-judgmental, and hold space for people as much as I can. I don't allow myself to be abused or manipulated. If I know that it's happening, I try to quickly put a stop to it. But, it's the best that I can do is recognize where I have hurt people and work not to, and recognize where other people might be hurting me and put up a boundary. And if I can't, then I have to weigh it out. I was in a situation for a while where I was, and I knew that I was, but I couldn't get out, being manipulated. And it was just a waiting game, a lot of people are manipulated in their jobs, for instance, and you can't just quit, right? Because of all the reasons I said. It's not as easy as just walking away. So I understand that from a financial aspect. I understand that from an emotional aspect. If you're in a relationship that's really rocky, it's not as easy as just moving out of your abusive boyfriend's house. It doesn't happen that way. And it's really privileged for anybody to have the perspective that anybody can just make the choice to change their life on a whim without any preparation or concern for the consequences. it lacks nuance. And, you know, I'm getting a little bit off track, but this EP really reminded me of a lot of that, is that there's only so much choice in our actions, and a lot of what we're doing is unfortunately either pre-programmed or I don't want to say predestined, but that's kind of a good word, predestined or predisposed, simply based on our environment. So we can't get better if we simply don't have access to what is better. And that's really sad. And I don't want to leave this episode on a downer note, but you know, this one was kind of tough. It really was. It hit a lot of different feels for me, because I worked with people who have all sorts of situations I don't understand. You know, I've worked with people who do. I've known people who've been in some of these, you know, obviously ICP's basically auditory cartoons, right? They're going to exaggerate and be eccentric and whatever else, because because it sells, and two, because that's their imagery. But breaking it down the way that I've done and making it serious, you know, argument, we'll say, for the themes that they're talking about, it really sets a tone that, like, there can be good things in it, and it's still not happy music. It's not always angry, but it's really not happy, because they're talking about a lot of the problems that people are experiencing in their personal lives, whether that's economic, romantic, you know, experiencing racism. They're talking about that stuff in a way that they can reach people who don't necessarily understand it. And some will, right? There are quite a lot of people who will hear this and be like, I went through that, and that's my stuff. That's what I'm listening to. Then there are people like me who grew up pretty fucking cushy in a middle class home, and I was like, man, like, I feel like I'm an outsider, and this is music and a subculture that seems to accept me as being an outsider. And then knowing that basically once I left my parents and was kind of out on my own, that I was poor, right? I haven't been middle class in a long time. Recognizing all of that, how much privilege I had, how much privilege I don't have in that way, but do have in others. And what can I do with what I do have to make me less of someone else's problem, to make whatever I'm doing, you know, it's that whole leave a better tomorrow, you know, or I think you know what I'm trying to say. Like, do better today for tomorrow, because maybe I messed up yesterday, and that's okay. But if I can do better today, I have a better chance tomorrow. That's just the attitude I'm trying to keep, is like, you know, eventually I'll be able to plan a week ahead in this metaphor. But right now I'm just like, man, I really don't want to do the wrong thing today. So most days I don't do the wrong thing, and that's pretty alright. And when I do the wrong thing, I'm trying to be quick to make it right. That's really what it is. So, yeah, that EP is heavy. It really is. If you dissect it the way that I just did, it can be really heavy. And there's hope at the end of it. Why? Because look at me. I'm on the internet talking about this EP as a fan, and there are countless others like me who've heard this message and who know what the fuck I'm talking about. So if that's you, great. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're having this discussion. If you want to follow along on this journey that we're taking into ICP's music, keep an eye on the playlist. It's going to continue to update every 2 weeks. The weeks in between, I'm talking about Alcoholics Anonymous, so if you are a sober Juggalo, you could check that out. Maybe you've been through AA. You might appreciate some of the stuff I say over there. Same sort of lens, dissecting the big book with my perspective as I see it now. So yeah, keep a lookout. I'm uploading a video or if you're listening, an episode. I'm uploading an episode every single week. Every 2 weeks will be ICP music. Every other week in between will be Alcoholics Anonymous. Check it out. If it's not your thing, whatever. That's the glory of the internet, is find your thing. Apparently this is my thing. People really like my Juggalo videos. They have the most views on my channel so far. I'm going to keep doing them. People like them. I'm not getting a whole lot of feedback, but the feedback that I do get is pretty positive. So I'm just going to keep talking about it. Glad to have you here. Again, if you like what I'm doing, like, follow, subscribe, click all the buttons. I've got some social media. It's usually Instagram and Threads. Send me some Venmo or PayPal or Cash App. I'll have all that stuff below. I lied about PayPal because I don't think I even use that for this. But, send me a couple bucks. Let me know you appreciate me. It pays for my coffee sometimes. That's kind of cool. Still trying to get a interview / guest speaker going on. We're supposed to do that with a friend, and we haven't picked a day yet, so that will happen. Probably won't be on the Juggalo playlist, but it will be coming up soon, so keep your eye out for that. Also, I had a friend of mine write a little jingle for me, so in coming episodes, I'm going to figure out how to edit it in based on different stuff I'm talking about, because I want to have better transitions sometimes, instead of just being like, I finished talking and the next point is, because that's not a good segue. Some people appreciate that because it feels more raw, and I get that. For me, it feels right to have some sort of transition in some cases. So I might have that, which means my videos might be broken up onto the bar for them, the zoomy bar at the bottom. I don't know what it's called. The playback bar, where you get the seeker bar, if you will. So I'm going to have that, not on this one, but on coming episodes, I will have that broken up into sections, so that you can click around. Maybe you don't want to listen to the whole video in one sitting. That's valid. I talk a lot, and it's probably easier for some people to digest this in 5 to 10 minute segments. Perfect. That's coming up. I don't know when, but soon. I'm going to start working on it and figure out better video editing skills. So as I said, click all the buttons, like all the things, follow me on the socials, comment below, let me know what you thought. Send me a message. Let me know if I need to correct something. I said that at the beginning. I'm not always correct. I don't want to be always correct. I want to try to be, because I'm arrogant, and also consider it a self-improvement. So let's improve together. If you want to talk about anything, whatever, message me, comment below. We can see how it works. I can consider different themes for different, my next review, basically. I might be able to incorporate something I've learned from somebody. Discussion's always welcome. That's how we learn. So I'm gonna trap my yap here, because otherwise I'll keep talking endlessly. We all know I can do that. Glad to have you all. See you on the next episode.